cases that involve children tend to be more personal for everyone, and with a great deal of urgency in the kidnapping of a young person. When a child is kidnapped, we know statistically that every hour that passes decreases our chances of finding them alive. When I was called into this case, the searchers had been scouring the area for 4 days, and at that point, nobody knew if they were looking for the missing boy or for his body. But when I looked at what was reported to be the abduction site, I knew that things were not what they seemed to be.
Bradford County, Florida. Population 20,000. In this small rural community, neighbors have grown up together and people rarely lock their doors. But on this quiet summer morning, the usual calm is about to be shattered. Bradford County Sheriff's Detective Roman Alvarez arrives at the home of a distraught mother. Her 13-year-old son is missing.
This is the location to which the deputy came when he received the call from the parents. They told him that their son had been missing for approximately 24 hours. And they had searched the area and they were very concerned because they had not seen him in that length of time.
Their son's name is J.D., and this is not his typical behavior.
I know that there was something wrong with him not coming home because he liked to eat a lot, so he'd come home to eat at least. And then he'd go play with his friends. But that day he didn't.
J.D.'s family had only recently moved to this quiet country neighborhood, and this was the last thing they expected.
I just stayed on my knees and begged God to bring my son back home safe to me.
Investigators are already 24 hours behind the events that led to J.D.'s disappearance. If he's been abducted, he could be almost anywhere by now.
One of the first things that we wanted to do was establish the point or the time when the child was last seen. We were fortunate when we connected with the school and talked with the bus driver to learn that he'd been dropped off at this bus stop here and that she had put him off about 2:30 in the afternoon.
So far, it's all part of J.D.'s normal routine.
This is the road that the juvenile would have taken after he was let off the bus to walk up to his house. And this is the area, the wooded area that we began to search.
Investigators immediately begin to canvass the neighborhood, hoping to find someone who saw J.D. after he left the bus stop.
The boy's father told Chief Deputy Henry about an individual, a man that lived down the road, whose name was Jerry, and that the missing boy had had some contact with him.
Officers decide to pay Jerry a visit.
Chief Henry went to the residence, and a white male came to the door who identified himself as Jerry Maynor. When asked if he had and shown a picture of the missing juvenile, he said he had not seen him for a while. And Chief Deputy left, and when he ran through the system, the name Jerry Maynor came up negative.
No one has seen J.D. since he got off the bus more than 24 hours ago. The 13-year-old boy is officially listed as missing. Day 2. Dozens of searchers descend on the scene. If there's a clue out there, they need to find it, and they need to find it soon.
150 officers from all over the area and all over the state are combing wooded areas around the dirt road.
The man in charge of the search is Lieutenant David Thompson. He hopes to find a sign that will tell them if J.D. is still alive or not.
The search was started right here at the boys' residence. We had search parties on both sides of Highway 301. Each individual is going to be within sight of an individual on his right or his left, and they try to stay on line and push through these heavily wooded areas.
But by the end of the day, searchers haven't found a single clue.
The intensity level is pretty high because everybody's always looking at the worst scenario, that the child may have been killed. They're hoping for the best, but they're always looking for the worst.
Day 3, the search continues. And finally, not far from the road, they find something. A notebook lying in the dirt that turns out to belong to J.D.
It was found a couple of 100 feet off of the roadway, somewhere between where he got off the bus and toward his house. And it was determined that it was the juvenile's notebook. And it was important because the location of it would help us theorize what may have happened.
Investigators may have found the site where J.D. was abducted, but that's where the trail stops. J.D. has been missing for 3 full days, and the police have no new leads.
The investigators needed someone who could help to focus the investigation, and that's what a profiler is trained to do. During my training at the FBI, I learned how to look at physical evidence and the behavioral clues of a crime scene to try to figure out what really happened and what kind of perpetrator we should be looking for. When I was first called into this case, the investigators were considering all of the possibilities of what might have happened to this child.
Hinman knows that in kidnapping cases, time is critical.
Statistically, the more time that passes, the greater the possibility that the child has met with foul play. But things aren't always what they appear to be.
13-year-old J.D. hasn't been seen since he stepped off the school bus 3 days ago. The only sign of him is his notebook found near the side of the road. But investigators aren't sure what it means. They hope the insights of an FBI-trained profiler will shed new light on the investigation. Special Agent Dale Hinman meets with Detective Alvarez to review the details of the case. She starts at the beginning, the crime scene itself.
One of the most important things that we found was the discovery of a notebook that was identified by his parents as being his notebook. And it was important because at least we had a specific direction to go.
But Agent Hinman isn't so sure that what they're looking at is an actual crime scene.
This was very suspicious to me because in many of the other kidnapping cases that we've seen, the person takes great care to make sure that the sheriff's office or the police will have no indication where any crime occurred.
Why would a kidnapper leave behind an obvious clue, unless he wanted the police to find it?
This looks like to me that this was deliberately left to mislead the police, so this could be staged to make the police think that something else has happened here.
And Hinman doesn't think a kidnapper would bother to stage a crime scene if he was going to kill the victim.
So this piece of evidence led me to believe that the child was alive and that we were going to find him.
If Agent Hinman is correct, the kidnapper is keeping J.D. alive. But for how much longer?
Sadly, we don't often have an opportunity to be involved in a kidnapping case where we find the child alive. But in this case, we really felt that he was, so every moment counted in trying to locate this child and bring him back to his family alive. As an investigator, the most logical place to start is with the victim's family and then move outward from there, following every lead to its end.
Neighbors and school officials tell detectives that J.D. and his stepfather have been arguing a lot lately.
We were made aware by family members that there was some discord, obviously, between the juvenile's father and himself. It had to do mostly with some difficulties he seemed to be having in school.
But why would the boy's stepfather kidnap him and then make it look like an abduction by some unknown stranger.
Statistically, we know that crimes of interpersonal violence are most often committed by the victim's family or by people who know them well. In order to understand what was going on with this victim and their family, the best place to go to get this information was to the school, because the counselors and the teachers are impartial observers of this individual, and they can tell you more about what's going on in that family than anybody else can.
Agent Hinman hopes JD's school counselor will have some of the answers she's looking for.
Tell me a little bit about JD.
Something that was very unusual I remember about JD was that he would come by to see me almost every day. And that's very unusual because in 6th grade, they begin exerting their independence a little bit.
Could JD's need for attention be a sign of problems at home? Agent Hinman knows that JD and his stepfather argued at the school the same day JD disappeared. Now, she wants to know why.
So his stepfather came to the school, is that correct?
Yes, he did. He seemed concerned that his grades were falling down, and he talked with the principal and asked the principal if he would contact each teacher and ask that he was sat near the front of the class.
This new information provides Hinman with a different picture of the family dynamic.
After interviewing the stepfather and meeting with the school counselor, I felt more sure that the stepfather wasn't involved in any way in the disappearance of JD. Sure, he had come to the school and maybe he had been a little bit rough in terms of speaking with the principal, but I saw this as a stepfather who was very interested in the education of the child and that he really wanted the best for him.
Hinman thinks it's unlikely JD's stepfather is the kidnapper, but she's sure someone has taken the 13-year-old and that he may still be alive. Coming up next, footprints in the mud and an abandoned campsite. Have investigators finally caught the trail of the missing boy and his abductor? It has now been over a week since 13-year-old JD went missing from his home in rural Bradford County. And profiler Dale Hinman is certain that a staged crime scene means the boy is still alive. But with his stepfather removed as a possible suspect, investigators need a new lead, and they need it fast. Day 8. As searchers continue to move south from where JD's notebook was found, they uncover what could be the next big clue.
Search parties on the east side of the highway found footprints in a farm field to the south of there of an adult and a young person.
Could these prints belong to JD and his abductor?
It wasn't somebody that was working in the field because they stayed right on the edge of the field, closer to the highway.
If these are JD's prints, it would mean that the boy is alive and walking, and in Bradford County. Searchers continue south along Highway 301, hoping for another sign. They find one. Investigators arrive at the scene, wondering if they may even find the boy himself.
Back off in here about 175 to 100 yards, there's an old campsite. Somebody had spent the night there. There was a fire there that was still warm. Fresh cans and stuff, and somebody had cooked something there.
Investigators scour the area, but find no other clues. Once again, JD and his abductor have disappeared. Still, Agent Hinman is sure that the footprints and campsite confirm her original theory, that the boy is still alive.
The fact that you have two sets of footprints, one large and one small, and evidence of food being consumed here, and that the child is still walking at this point, this could mean that he's still alive.
Alive, maybe, but not out of danger. With the trail once again gone cold, Agent Hinman needs another way to track the boy. Back at her hotel, a review of the case file reinforces her belief that this is not an abduction by a total stranger.
JD was not the type of boy who would go willingly with a stranger. He was a street-smart young guy. He would be prepared for life's problems. If somebody had approached him who was an absolute stranger, he certainly would have run.
This means the abductor had to be someone JD knew.
We encourage the investigators to look for somebody in this community who JD knew and who was no longer in the area that they might have left together.
When investigators go back through the list of everyone they've talked to, sure enough, one person has left the area, Jerry Maynard, the man investigators had talked to the day after JD disappeared. Coming up next, is this the man who took JD? Nearly 10 days since a 13-year-old boy was abducted from this quiet neighborhood, investigators' prime suspect is a local resident who has also disappeared. The man's name is Jerry Maynard, the same neighbor investigators had talked to the day JD was reported missing.
Two things about Jerry Maynard made him suspicious. First, that he was hanging around with young people, and second, when the detectives went back to interview him, he had left the area.
Detectives need a way to track Maynard, and they find one. Along the same stretch of Highway 301, where investigators have found every other clue, a truck is stolen from a roadside produce stand. Detectives wonder if it's more than a simple vehicle theft.
After talking with the owners of the produce market and learning not only had a truck been stolen, but that food had been stolen, it sent off some type of alarm in my mind that perhaps this had been used as a means of exit for Maynard and the child.
They need to start looking for the stolen truck, but it could be anywhere in the United States. But Agent Hinman knows that even kidnappers have people they stay in touch with, especially when they need help.
A logical place to start is to look at his phone records. He was previously living in Virginia, and so we subpoenaed his phone records to find out who he had called to look for other places, maybe in the state of Florida or elsewhere, where he would have a place to go.
One of the places the phone records lead them to is Tampa, Florida. Agent Al Dana is assigned to the case.
Maynard had a couple of associates that lived in the Tampa Bay area, and we got an address and a surveillance on the address.
The first thing they notice, a truck matching the description of the vehicle stolen from the fruit stand back in Bradford County.
It had a placard on the side of the truck and a license plate that did not belong on the truck. These things are used by people that steal trucks as a place to kind of disguise the car. The officers went to the door to investigate further.
From the outside, the agents see no sign of Maynard or the missing boy. They have no idea what they'll find inside.
You always got to take in consideration if the man could be armed. We're not sure if maybe he had already killed the boy.
The agents enter the apartment. Inside, they find a man matching Maynard's description, and sitting next to him, a teenaged boy.
The man questioned, he gave the name of Gary Wales, and the boy said it was his uncle, and the law enforcement, the agents questioned him a little bit further, and the man basically said, "I'm Jerry Maynard."
And the boy with him is JD, who had visited Maynard on the day he disappeared, and then been tricked into running away with the older man. Now, 12 days after his abduction, JD is returned safely to his family.
I was just so thrilled I cried. That's the best news a mother could get, or a parent could get, is knowing that they could actually have another chance with their child after a child has been through something like that. So it was the best thing that ever happened to me, was to hold him again.
Jerry Maynard is charged with interference with the custody of a minor and battery. He is sentenced to 30 years in prison.
As a profiler, I'm not very often given the opportunity to work on an investigation where we're not just trying to solve a case, we're trying to save a life. It's hard to put into words what it's like for investigators to be able to return a missing child to his family. Cases that involve children tend to be more personal for everyone, and when we find a child and bring them back safe, it's very gratifying.